This is World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment with your host, Carl Gruber. World Awakenings is a podcast dedicated to opening your mind, your heart, and your eyes to the fact that the world's population is now, more than ever, awakening to all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening, and just how they play an all-important role in our daily life. So join Carl on this enlightening experience as he interviews metaphysical and spiritual experts to discuss, debate, and delve deeply into the hows and whys of this worldwide awakening.
Welcome to the World Awakenings podcast. But before we start, I'd like to tell you about my very special ebook I wrote called The 3 Pillars, a simple 3-step process to manifest positive and permanent change in your life. This concise 32-page 3-pillar ebook will teach you how to become a successful and consistent co-creator of your life path with the law of attraction. Yes, you can manifest the life you truly desire. And this ebook is absolutely free. Simply scan the QR code you now see on the screen or click on the link you see below in the show notes and get your free download today. The 3 Pillars ebook, written by me, Carl Gruber, will positively change your life. Download your copy today. Wow, just plain wow. It is hard for me to believe that this is episode number 195 of this show, World Awakenings, a fast track to enlightenment. Hi, I'm your host, Carl Gruber, and it seems to me just like yesterday that I started this show, but it was in 2018 when my first episode made its debut online, and during this past 7 years, I've been blessed to speak one-on-one with some of the world's greatest teachers, experts, masters, spiritual leaders, mystics, and authors on all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening. So, let us continue this path as we now meet today's guest. Now, today we have the great pleasure of welcoming Brian Curtis to the show. Brian was an electrician for 25 years, at which point he quit his job to venture out into the unknown and follow his heart. Now, after months of turning into years of creating and receiving, he learned that the process was all leading to a reconciliation with the self. The work became much less important than the inner state the process creates. So he has dedicated his life to helping people understand how to heal the heart, and the only place where everything comes from and goes back to. Now, he is also the author of a new book, which I am really looking forward to talking about. It is called There Is Only One Heart. So with that, hey, Brian, welcome to World Awakenings.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I am excited, after looking and doing my research into everything that you do and your new book, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But, it sounds like you had a pretty interesting turn of event in your life's journey when you left your electrician job at 25 years to follow your heart. Can you give us an idea about the young Brian that led you to making this big change in your life?
Well, we go to work, basically just to make money and kind of survive, right? And most of us do that when we go to work on any job. And you don't even realize what your motivations are until you really leave those work settings. So, but before then, I just knew I wanted to do something different. I'd been an electrician for 25 years. My work environments were getting a little bit more toxic. There was people weren't communicating as well. Most of my friends weren't happy with the job. So, half of the people I'd worked with, even over a 10-year period, had left. And, there were some work accidents that happened from just conflicts happening between people. And it just got to where I just didn't want to be there anymore. I knew there was something more for me in this life. And, jumping out into the entrepreneurial world is a rude awakening for anybody that has never done it, right? Especially if you have no plan in sight, right? If you have no idea what you're going to do and I'm going to jump out there and just see what I have to offer the world. You learn about yourself fairly quickly. And and it never stops, actually. It keeps happening. And you kind of, your awareness grows, and you become more and more self-aware. And I think that's what we're seeing in the group collective in a lot of ways. You see, self-awareness has become one of the main topics for any coach or consultant, or it doesn't matter what you're talking about. It's always has to do with self-awareness. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. And so I am curious, was there a particular moment or experience that blew things wide open that made you discover, go off to find your true higher self and the nature of reality?
Well, I knew, from a very young age, I was always somebody that felt interconnected with everybody. I never felt like I was apart from anybody else, if that makes sense. And so I always did my best to, try and ground out any kind of negativity that I was experiencing. But, if it doesn't feel like you're, you know, the, I guess you could say what caused me to leave my job more than anything was the fact that it didn't feel like I was doing anything, where I was having a positive impact on that environment. And it's just the way it's structured, that so many work environments are structured in a way where you can't really positively impact it as a frontline employee.
Mhm.
Either you just kind of do what you're told, or you can leave. And that was pretty much my choice. So I think that was the end result. I did try to make positive efforts and try and say, hey, look, I think there's better ways we can work together. We can make decisions as groups, and try and bring more creativity, and co-development in what we're doing. But it didn't work out. So, you know, one day I just decided it was it.
I think you're describing scenarios that unfortunately hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people can relate to. I mean, a long line of frustration of not being able to contribute in the way you would like or make a positive difference. And I think it's a natural result that one would want to seek, your higher purpose. And I think as we grow and mature, that, yeah, well, what did I come here for? And it sounds like that's kind of the path you followed.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I meet so many people, and I've met so many new entrepreneurs to the community just in the last couple of months. You've got a lot of big businesses that are laying a lot of people off. Intel, Boeing. I didn't even know Boeing was laying people off until I met somebody from the I think the Dallas area in Texas, where Boeing laid off a significant number of people from their plant in Texas. And so there's just a lot of things happening under the surface because consumer demand's down, that it's really hard. They don't talk about it on TV. You don't hear. You really have to dig if you and meet people that are in specific situations in order to really understand what's happening in the marketplace. Uh, there's so many new things that are trying to come to market, but so many things are just paper launching because a lot of these companies aren't able to even get products to market, that they were much easier, let's say 10 months ago. Things are changing fairly rapidly. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, lightning speed. But one thing I would like to discuss about you, I did read that, and you kind of touched on it earlier, you're quite an empath. And we know that empathetic people are hypersensitive to other people's frequencies and energies and emotions. And that can be a big problem because I mean, it's almost like a disempowering having your life energy sucked out of you when you allow yourself to do that. How do you deal with that?
That's most of the journey, right? And the journey to empath is all about being able to transmute negativity from your environment and making sure that you're not getting negatively impacted by even negative projections on you. Because, if you're an empath, most empaths will agree that there really isn't any one of us that is better or worse or more capable than the other, because all of us go through similar emotional states, and we all go through, you know, there's so many wide range of things that we go through, but that doesn't define us, right? The things that we think and the things that we experience isn't defining us. We're the creator of those things. And when you can take charge and understand that you have the power to create any state of being at any moment, that's the real journey. That's where you could walk into any setting and really change the environment just because you've mastered yourself in a way where you're not going to feel negative because somebody's acting this way, or and you can take charge. Especially, it's a spiritual battle, right? There's a spiritual battle taking place a lot of times, especially when you go into communities where you've got a lot of different projected energies, and you can see it in the group collective. Just the level of despair will start to rise when people lose hope. That's a spiritual battle. That's something that you can directly assault and say, hey, look, all we got to do is work together and build something together. It's not a big deal. It's just that if you get too if you get too caught up in and attached to something created, that's what creates those negative emotional states, right? Like if I don't have enough, or if I don't have this. I mean, I'm a walking example of just synchronicity after synchronicity that I'm constantly being taken care of on my journey. That all I have to do is make sure that I'm taking care of myself, to make sure that I'm in the right state of mind for the people around me at all times, and I will be taken care of. I don't have to worry about selling services. All I have to do is just do what I'm asked and master myself energetically, for
You know,
sure.
I think what you just said there, so casually but so profound, is that we are the creator of our reality in the moment, and we can create the reality we want. But most people have no clue that they can do that.
Yeah. That's one thing, and that's kind of my banner on my LinkedIn profile is, we're all creators and we all create our own reality. The trick is to make sure that you're pushing the needle towards conscious creation instead of unconscious creation. Because so many of the actions that we do, we'll unconsciously condemn ourselves and not even realize it. When if we think, oh, I need to do this and this before this and this and this, and you're actually working in a state of fear without even realizing it, instead of um, it's just unconscious. And the more that you do the inner work, and the more that inner journey takes place, and you'll start to understand how your mind works, and how you know people will, especially if people are pointing at their environment or somebody else and blaming somebody else for the way they feel, you start to pick up on that more and more, along the way. And once you can master that, and you can raise yourself out of those lower states of awareness, you can help people pull themselves out of that as well, right? Because none of us are victims. We're unconsciously creating our own reality at all times, for sure.
Well, I've brought this topic up, or actually, many of my guests have brought up the topic of being a victim. That is the mentality of most of the 8 billion people on the planet. But, shows like this and what you do, we're trying to bring them out of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, let's dive into, because I'm fascinated with your book. There is only one heart. Can you tell us about how it came to be that you felt the need to write this book?
I was inspired because when I first left my job, my idea I just wanted people to work together in a better way, where you didn't have a smaller group kind of control a bigger group. So what I wanted to do was just create a decentralized decision-making system. So people could any group of people could come together and make a decision as a group, and uh, let those things run through that group machine making. It was kind of a randomized voting process kind of thing, where you just randomize out of a group and then have everybody so they could view it. And I've always known that ideas, if you can expose them to a larger group of people, will always become better. It doesn't matter how good of an idea I have. If I can expose it to somebody else, then that idea is going to always be better if I can bounce it off. And if I can get a large percentage of people to agree on which direction to go. And so that was what I wanted to do. But after I realized that I was trying to overcome a lot of hurdles, especially if you're trying to raise money to build software. And, it got to where I was just like, all right, I need to write a book, at least until for the reason why I'm even interested in building something like that. Because, we've been doing things in hierarchical systems for so long, and we've just gotten used to working that way together, that we need to understand why we can do something different. There's no reason we have to keep doing things the same way we've been doing them. We can pivot today, but if we're tied energetically to the past too much, we don't see the things that are just straight in front of us, and innovation breaks down and our personal creativity breaks down. You know, uh, the products that we build together break down because we're not creating, you know, like children in a group, the way we want to, we just all want to be kids and create together. And so that's why I wrote the book, because in truth, and the reason why I named the book There Was Only One Heart is because if you look at any system, doesn't matter if you're looking at a galaxy or a solar system, or you're always looking at some kind of toroidal field where there's one point where everything comes from and then it goes back to. I mean, your body is the same way. A tree, the world tree is an excellent example. That's why the symbol of the world tree is so old. You're just looking at literally just the state of reality, that it doesn't matter what point in time space you're looking at, there's only one. And in order to make time, you have to expand that point. So everything in that field is moving. That's why we've never found anything that isn't moving. There's nothing that is static. It's constantly moving and growing and learning about itself. The whole history of evolution is just the expansion of awareness, where all these fields become more and more self-aware, where they're moving more energy and information through that field. We're just going through an evolutionary process, literally.
That's interesting. You talk about a torsional field, that everything is moving. One of my past guests and one of my favorite authors, Brendan D. Murphy from Australia, wrote a book called The Grand Illusion, the Synthesis of Science and Spirituality. And he talks about, he did in-depth scientific research, citing many scientific research papers, that there is a torsional field where everything comes out of it. And then on my last show, I had a money mindset coach on here. We dove into the metaphysics, spirituality, and energetics of money, and he said the same thing. They said money is a circle, a cycle, and it just flows around, and kind of what you were talking about.
Right. Yeah, money is an interesting thing. I think there's some misunderstandings about what money is, right? Money is actually more of a capacitance more than a currency, because we're storing our energy into something and then we're using it to kind of move things, right? And it also, in a lot of ways, from a spiritual aspect, it's almost like pressure. So if you're putting a lot of creative pressure, into something, then you're kind of getting that capacitance back. It's almost like I would say it's more like capacitance, just because I have an electrical background.
Right, right.
Yeah, we are the currency, right? The me speaking right now is my currency. So if I'm, if you feel energetically blocked in any way, you're holding too much capacitance. You've got too much resistance in the body. Same thing would happen from somebody that's holding on to $10 million and doesn't know what to do with it. They've got all that capacitance sitting there, but they don't know what to do with it. They could use it to move things, but unless you're using it to move people and create things, then what are we doing with it, right? It's just sitting there. Yeah.
You're like a new earth electrician talking about capacitors and currency. In a beautiful manner. I love it. But, one other thing that I was looking at, chapter 1 of your book is titled Everything is Alive. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah. Basically just what I said, I mean, everything's moving. There's nothing that's ever been not moving. And so I think the definition of something that's dead is something that's not moving, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at anything, even if you think it dies, if you look at it close enough, it's moving. There's something moving in there. It's not, nothing ever really dies. And it just changes states of, they say it changes states of matter, but even the definition of matter is hard, hard to wrap your head around, because we haven't ever found anything that's solid. When we look at everything close enough, it's just, even the structures that we see when we look at them close enough are just stacked fields. An atom is moving so fast, it's moving 100 trillion times faster than you're moving, but it's also 100 trillion times smaller. So it's almost like we're living in a projected reality of one mind, that the only way that it can create separation is to create relativity of size and time and how fast it switches back and forth between positive and negative. It's very interesting. And everything they haven't found anywhere where they haven't found life. They keep thinking that there's a place where we can look where there's no life, but every time they can actually measure it, they find life there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I would think somebody who really steeped deeply in the 3D realm would say, "Well, a rock doesn't move. That's not moving. It's not alive." But no, it's everything is energy. A rock is made of composed of energy and atoms that are always moving, right?
yeah, there isn't anything that's not moving. In a lot of ways, if you look at it close enough, it's moving so fast you can barely see it. And when they look so deep into something and they think that they found the smallest thing. Oh, here's the smallest thing that we can find. Must be a particle. And they look at it close enough and it's just moving so fast that it's vibrating so fast because it's so small that it almost looks like it's static, but it's not. It's moving.
What is that one? They've created those gigantic colliders where they were seeking the Higgs boson particle or whatever, which is supposed to be the tiniest thing. And if I think maybe they say they've discovered it, but there's probably even a smaller division of that. I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, I have a good story on that one.
Yeah.
My brother called me up one day and he said, "Hey, somebody's coming from the Hadron Collider to speak. One of the scientists from the United States was going to speak here at a local university." And I told him, I said, "Well, I think those guys are just religious fanatics, don't you?" And he just laughed and he said, "Well, just go with me." I said, "Okay." So we went and she had worked on the Hadron Collider there, the Biggs, I can't remember the second name, but you just mentioned it.
Hmm.
Huge, multi-million-dollar project. I think it's a billion-dollar project, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So she went through the science of what they were doing, how they were colliding fields and getting into smaller, they're calling them particles. And after about 15 or 20 minutes, she was explaining of the smallest thing that they've found. And one of the local physics professors stood up at the university and said, "Well, how do you guys know that you weren't just looking at another unit of quanta or just another field of infinite potential?" And she said, "Well, we don't." And so everybody in the class kind of looked at each other and she didn't have anything really else to say. And we just all got up and left. And that was it. It's almost like a belief system that they want to try and believe that matter has to exist, right? There has to be something solid. And if we're going to find it no matter what, and they just haven't, they can't find it.
And it seems to me, I think in your book you have a chapter on what is the split screen experiment, where it shows that when you place your attention on the result that you desire, that's what you get. And so the scientists have that same problem. Well, we're seeking this particle, and they're probably going to end up finding it because their attention, their consciousness creates it.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you realize, and all the science really shows it, that when you believe in something hard enough, you can create it. And if you're the creator, what you're seeing, what you're witnessing is something that you're creating. And this goes back to the victimized consciousness, right? If you want to believe that you're a victim, you're creating unconsciously those scenarios around you to reinforce that belief.
Yeah.
It happens, it's we're living in a conscious co-creative universe where we're all one and just trying to learn why we're hurting ourselves constantly, right?
Yeah.
And learn why, if something that I'm thinking, or it starts with thought, right? The first thought that enters your mind and then it comes out in the way you speak. If you're condemning your environment at all, you're condemning yourself, because the thing that you're condemning is just unaware of itself. We are all unaware. And I just talked to somebody about this yesterday. If I am ignorant of even one thing, then I am unaware of how much I'm actually ignorant of. So how can you actually blame anybody for any level of ignorance? I'll always be ignorant. If I am not the whole in and of itself, I'll always be ignorant of potentially an infinite amount of things. So, you know, the expansion of awareness and, you know, if you historically and geologically is basically why we're alive, which is just to keep expanding.
Yeah, yeah, and that's an excellent point. But I was looking at the table of contents of your book. It seems that literally you cover almost every aspect of the new awakening and transition of humankind. Now, one thing that I was interested in, you mentioned there's a section about astrology and numerology. You mentioned the numbers 369. What do they have to do with frequency and creation?
I think that's an interesting, uh, and this is something that I researched and saw a couple of videos on before I even wrote that chapter. You know, the old Masonic symbol of the compass and the square is kind of a, you know, if you put 0 to 9 or 1 to 9 in a circle, and then just draw the relation between the two. 3 and 6 flops back and forth, which shows the frequency of where it's coming from. 9 is always the 0 point because every time you add 9 upon 9 upon 9, it just breaks down to 9. 9 is one of those numbers that stays at the 0 point. It's 9 will always stay 9. Um, and so the 3 and the 6 shows the frequency. And then the other numbers actually is the structure that's created by the frequency, the number of times. So when you look at the state of reality, it's actually kind of describing the state of reality, that the number of times creates a structure, and we can actually do that experiment. You know, if you've seen the plate where they put sand on a plate and then
Yeah.
they increase the frequency, and as the frequency increases, the structure changes on top of there. So you're actually seeing that frequency creates structure. Um, and the higher the frequency, the more information you're moving through that. So the more complex the structure has to be, which is you're looking at, you know, us as humans are more complex structures than cats. We're more complex structures than fish. We're more complex structures, you know, it's just moving more information and energy at more frequency, you know, being more self-aware. Yeah.
That experiment of putting sand on a plate that vibrates and they change the frequency and it changes the pattern, the frequency creates a particular pattern and it's almost geometrically perfect all the time,
Yeah.
and depending on the frequency.
Right. It is very cool, you know, and so many people have written so much about, you know, the state of water and how, and water can contain so many different types of structures because it's such a simple molecule. You know, you've just got three atoms there that can configure themselves in almost any way. So you can almost program water with just, and they've programmed water with just emotional states. You know, if you just emit a certain emotion, you can see it show up in the water. Yeah.
I think that's a really famous experiment. A Japanese doctor, I mean, I forget, Moto or something like that, did that. And he had samples of water. He spoke to one and said, I love you, I love you, I love you. And the other one, he showed anger and I hate you and everything, froze him. And when he brought it out, the crystals of the ice where he said, I loved you, were geometrically perfect. But the ones in where he showed anger and hate, the crystals were very chaotic. And
Yeah. Well, you're breaking something apart, right? You're deconstructing something. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, and that's another example. Everything's alive, right? So
Yeah, and both sides are actually part of the circuit because, you know, you kind of have to, there is a sort of divine anger in spiritual history as well, right? Because it breaks down structures that don't conform to love, that, and then something else comes out of it. But then as soon as something comes out of it, and if it gets corrupted over time, then eventually it has to break down because everything always conforms back into the idea that their love is just the expression that we are all one, which is just the natural state of reality, which is why I named the book that.
yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you've said so many profound things. We could probably do an entire show on each one of these topics. But yeah, and now this is kind of a big statement, big question, and I know you've kind of touched on a lot of this, but I know that quantum science is a big area of interest for you, obviously. What exactly is quantum science, and how can the everyday person apply its principles to live a happier and healthier life?
I think at the beginning of just knowing what quanta is just the word for just a unit of something, right? A quanta. But I think the idea behind quantum science is that they've realized that everything is pretty much instantaneously connected in space time. So there's, that is kind of a version that goes against particle physics, because particle physics breaks down if everything's instantaneously connected in space-time. And knowing that, if you just know that one principle and think about that, then you have to know that every frequency, every thought has a frequency that creates an emotional state that is going to instantaneously impact the world around you. Perfectly present. We mentioned money, and money is actually, in a lot of ways, will pull you out of the present moment. Because a lot of times if you feel like I have to save for tomorrow, right? You're focusing on something that is not right now. So especially if you're talking to somebody and you're spending time with somebody, instead of it's hard to get into your natural present co-creative energy in the now if you're constantly worried about what you could get out of it by tomorrow, if that makes sense, right?
Mhm.
If you're having attachment to what you could gain from that situation, then it pulls you out of a less original state, that you could spend a freer state, because there's an element of worry there. I think that we are going to evolve in states of consciousness. We'll be able to create abundance for each other so readily that I don't think, money might exist, but I don't think, we're not going to be emotionally tied to it, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Because if you're tied to any kind of outcome, it's hard to stay as present as you could be and just experience the field of intelligence that you're in, and be perfectly present.
Yeah, and that makes sense too. As a student and teacher of the law of attraction, normally when we're tied to something, especially emotionally, and we keep saying, I want it, I want it, I want it, we're actually creating resistance to it. And
Yeah.
that is very hard for somebody to understand. When they want something so bad, you just have to turn it over to the universe and allow it to flow. It's like the flow of money.
Life is about letting go, for sure, and letting go of the outcome and not worrying about, if I was worried about how much I was going to make from the book I was writing,
Yeah.
it would have been a different book. It just would have, I wouldn't have written it from my heart space, and it definitely would have been a different book. And even the second book I'm writing now would be a different book. Um, you kind of have to show how interconnected we are, and release from any kind of outcome or attachment of what you think you can get out of it, because we all value connection. That's what we want. That's what, we're a group of cells in a bigger organism. And that's a part of probably a bigger group of cells than even a bigger organism, and an ad infinitum, right? I mean, it's just this expansive thing that if you can wrap your mind around it. I don't think anybody can really wrap around the infinite that is out there, but it's like wheels within wheels, you know? Yeah.
Well, talking about quantum science, quantum physics, so one of my favorite authors, Lynn McTaggart, has written a couple groundbreaking books called The Field and The Intention Experiment, and she's a journalist, researcher, and she has shown that, like you say, everything is connected. There is no separation of anything. And scientists have shown that there's no vacuum in space. It's actually a maelstrom of constantly moving energetic particles. And distance, time and distance have nothing to do about in relation to these particles communicating with each other and moving from here to here with, you know, beyond, instantaneously. I love it. It's great stuff.
Yeah. And the power of intention is if you set an intent and just start walking towards that intent, you'll find out how many resistances you have in the body. That will teach you how much resistance you have in the body, especially, if you have an intent to say, I want to live on heaven on earth, right? Just create that intent. How do I create that intent? Or to expand the awareness of everybody to make them understand that we are all one and start walking towards that intent. I can tell you from firsthand experience, you'll have to break down pretty much every resistance of the body to continue to do that because um, there's no you're not trying to get anything out of it. You're just trying to raise the group collective so that we can become more one in all of our daily actions and our co-creative things. Like you and I are co-creating this right now, which is great.
Yeah, and going back to your book, "There's Only One Heart." I mean, you just have so many great topics in there, and I've had a number of guests over the years who speak about the value of plant medicines and psychedelics to help them blow open the doors of their limiting, disempowering paradigms. I see you have a chapter, and forgive me, I haven't read that chapter, but can you talk about this? Have you experienced plant medicines or psychedelics, and did it help you if you did?
Yeah, well, I mean, just like every other college student, I experimented. Well, most college students, I experimented with LSD when I was younger. And I witnessed something very profound happen that I read about in the book to somebody that I went to school with. He was somebody that I was living with who was having an increasingly hard time with a cocaine habit. He was he was dealing it and he was using too much of it to where I don't even think he was making money off of it anymore. And I saw him the night before that him and his friends had gotten a hold of some liquid LSD and they took, I think he took, and I just remember this number just because it's always stick with me because of what happened the next day, is he said he had taken 23 hits of liquid LSD.
Oh,
That's a lot. And he was a big guy. His name was Riley and super lovable guy. And I woke up the next morning. It was just after 4 a.m. and I could hear him crying out in my living room and he was bawling. And we went and sat, my cousin was living with me at the time and we sat down and talked to him and he'd already called his mom and she had gotten a plane ticket and he had faced all of his inner demons that night. And I mean, he wanted to become a monk. I mean, that was it. He had faced, his internal reality. If you take that much of any kind of a hallucinogen, it will break down every kind of, you'll be moving so much energy in the body. You have to face so much stuff internally that I witnessed it happen to him. So talked to him for a little while. He was just a different person. He wasn't still uh, on the drug. He had gotten off of it, but um, it changed him permanently. And we took him to the airport. He could put him on a plane. Never saw from him. Never saw him or heard from him again. And so I've always been curious to see what happened to him. But I've seen similar things happen to other people and heard of other stories where, especially, people do ayahuasca, right? That where they say it's almost worth 10 years of psychotherapy, where you have to deal with so many things internally when you take something like that. Um, and even the story of the person that invented LSD, that story of that German scientist who it soaked into his arm and he didn't know what was happening to him. And the whole world started melting around him and his level of fear got to where it just spiked and then all of a sudden it flashed over and then everything was colorful and beautiful and it was like he was a new human being and that's why they started all the college test trials on LSD right after that because of what he went through after they had soaked through his skin. So there is no doubt in my mind that hallucinogens do have the power to expand consciousness as long as you don't treat them the right way. Obviously, um, LSD or any of those aren't and actually, statistically, they're not a habitual drug. Nobody's interested in doing those habitually. They're not, they have no addictive quality to them. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, you're talking to a guy who went to college during the hippie era, so I might have had a little bit of fun myself, but I've never done plant medicines like ayahuasca or psilocybin or whatever, and many of my guests who've come on, they have done it in ceremonial, the plant medicines, which is the advised way to do it. Have like a shaman who can guide them through this journey, and they say that for many of them it's like a kundalini awakening.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Every experience I've had, and I've taken psilocybin since then, and I think you have to take quite a bit of psilocybin to get the kind of effects. But the John Hopkins research, on psilocybin was pretty profound, where they had, I think it was over a 70% success rate for curing people of depression. If they had a terminal illness of the elderly, they would give them high doses of psilocybin, and a 70% success rate is better than anything else they're doing, for depression, because those people went through an experience where they just felt this overwhelming feeling of there wasn't anything to fear, that they were connected to everything, and that fear of death just kind of melted away after they took that. And so there is no doubt in my mind that uh, psilocybin and similar chemicals probably had much to do with maybe even our evolutionary history.
Mm, yeah. Well, and it is curious when you think of how native cultures throughout all of history have discovered the spiritual uses of plant medicines and that type of thing in their own ceremonies. And evidently, it connects them closer to the universe and to nature.
Oh yeah. And they protect those. Michael Pollan did a that 4-part miniseries. I can't remember if it was on Netflix or if it was just uh, an individual program, but I think it's called How to Change Your Mind. And I think in the 4th episode, they cover peyote and the Native Americans that still, used peyote. And at a time, they were kind of going to war with the federal government. The federal government didn't want to let them use that in their religious ceremonies. And so they kind of became activists for the use of peyote because, they've been using it for thousands of years. And so, yeah, there is no doubt that there's a reason behind those things. And when we cut ourselves off to what nature has to offer us, why are we making something illegal that nature has to offer us? As long as we're responsible adults, and we're not giving it to 2-year-old children or, there is a responsible way to treat your environment. There's for sure.
Yeah, we are talking to Brian Curtis, the author of an awesome book called "There Is Only One Heart." And you just stated why are they controlling these natural substances, which leads me to I saw one of the topics of or chapters of your book is the government and the history of control. Does that have anything to do with it?
I think, well, yeah. I mean, there's always been a history of control, right? And if there's anything in our environment that's setting us free and it's expanding our awareness, and if the individual is finding freedom in larger and larger groups, then it would be in the interest of a control-based system to suppress that thing, right? I mean, that's just something that's historically it's in the written record. You can look at even the people that left Europe, the founding of this country, every effort from Europe, from there you can track it. It was all an effort to try and control the resources of this country and control the people, basically wanting to control our money system, because if you can control the currency or the capacitance, then you control the energetic exchange between two people. And so if and that was the whole purpose behind Bitcoin, why Bitcoin was started, because people want, well, we need a decentralized currency because we're tired of buying into other people's control-based systems of how they're regulating their energetic exchanges. And so, govern, the word govern means to control. So it is what it is. anybody that's trying to control the actions of someone else. And the only way that you can really do that is to measure your time. And so that's how you make time linear. So by measuring your time in a lot of ways, if you're measuring your time, you're doing yourself an injustice, because if you have instantaneous connection to all there is or ever was in the field, you're limiting what you have access to by measuring your time.
Well, I like that. I hadn't thought of it in that way, but I think government control has always been present in the history of mankind forever, and it still is that way. And I don't think it will ever change until humanity comes together, like you're talking about, and we join together in the understanding of there's only one heart. So it's beautiful, and we're going to wind up here in a little bit with Brian Curtis, but one thing I would like to mention, you state that the mind of God is centered in our heart. All we have to do is unlock it. I mean, that's what our journey about human enlightenment is all about, right?
Unlocking your heart space, yeah. Your brain won't tell you what's going on, but your heart, if you just follow your heart space, it will always lead you in the right direction. I can tell you that for sure. I mean, every project I've ever started, if I try to overthink it, it seems like I'm always being tried to be led in a different direction by my heart. So, yeah.
Even A Course in Miracles states that the source, God, the universe, doesn't hear your words when you're praying. It hears the prayer of your heart. And that's what it really answers. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And there's an institute called Heart Math that has done some, and I haven't delved really deeply into them, but they've been around for a long time and talks about the consciousness and the energy and the aura of the heart is way bigger than anything else that people can imagine.
Oh yeah. Actually, if you just look it up, if you look up the heart-brain connection, the amount of research that they're doing on the heart-brain connection is pretty astounding. They're starting to realize that your heart regulates way more of your body than even your brain does. They used to think that your brain pretty much did everything, but they're starting to realize that your heart is actually responsible for almost everything, and your brain is just a secondary organ. Yeah.
Wow, just awesome. Well, Brian, thank you for being here. Now, what is your website? What is the best way for people to connect with you?
I have a couple websites. I have a website based on the book, there's only one heart.com. You can get to me through that website or circuitbreaker.com. This symbol that I have behind me, Circuit Breaker, it's a group co-creative project. And actually, within the next couple of weeks, I'm finishing a second book called The Dream.
Oh, cool.
How to enter the dream as the dream maker. I'm finishing it off with kind of the old version of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and how accurate that movie is.
I love it.
If you really understand that movie and watch that movie, Gene Wilder really is the Candyman in that movie. And he really yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, all right, all right.
But you can get a hold of me there, or bcurtis@bcurtis.org, or look at my LinkedIn profile and look up Decentralized Systems, Brian Curtis. You'll find me.
Yeah, and I'll have those links in the show notes here. One thing I'm curious, do you do any one-on-one coaching or any workshops, live or virtual?
I am going to start doing workshops based on this new project that I'm starting. Kind of based on the laws of abundance, like you said. All you have to do is show your heart for the community and do what it is that you feel like you need to do, and you'll be supported. And the process of going through that will break so much fear and resistance down in the body. You'll become so sensitive to the energetic states of the people around you. You'll be able to ground out negativity in your environment and just heal it naturally just by being you. That process, and that's what that process does, is getting into your creative energy and creating from your heart space. It's a powerful experience that I am going to start that class here pretty soon after I finish this second book. But I also want to start a co-creative project, a community co-creative project. because there's so many people that I think that it would really help the community if you had a group of people that could take care of the needs of the community. Because there's so many people, as consumer demand's going down, because more and more people have less money to spend. And I think if people understand that there's always help there, all you have to do is ask, and you have to be humble enough to ask, and to understand that this all is out here for you. Everything outside of you is for you, and it's an extension of you. And if you treat it that way and understand that there isn't any situation that you can't get out of, all you have to do is ask, then you become much more humbled by the process and understanding what people's needs are. So,
And with that, what a beautiful way to finish his show. Thank you, Brian Curtis, for being on World Awakenings. You are awesome. Thank you, brother.
Thanks, Carl. Love being here.
This has been another episode of World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment with host Carl Gruber, a certified law of attraction life coach. We welcome you to tune in to each and every episode of World Awakenings as we open your mind, your heart, and your eyes to the fact that the world's population is now, more than ever, awakening to the truth of all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening, and just how much they play an all-important role in our moment-to-moment daily life. Much love and light to you, my friend, and thank you for tuning into World Awakenings.